We are going to be working on the hem. If you're doing the traditional hem for the shirt, you should already have pretty much constructed the entire shirt and attached the neckband. We are going to now look at the bottom edge of the shirt. I'm going to go ahead and peel off my tape there. I'm going to throw that away, and if you have any other tape pieces left as you go around here, you can throw those away as well. You're going to be folding that edge up 1 inch if you're working on the bottom seam. So 1 inch. Now you should have a memory hem, which was a crease that you made with the iron earlier on in the project. So your fabric may remember that and go ahead and fold up just the right amount. But you want to have your seam gauge handy and measure a 1 inch space, and it is important that it is the same distance all the way around. Because we're going to be using the cover stitch machine, you want to make sure that it is really straight and even so that when you are cover stitching, it catches in all areas. So I am going to go ahead and place a pin in right here. And here, just a few places, because my fabric really wants to curl up on me. And then I am going to just kind of press between those pins. You have to do whatever it takes to get your fabric to lay flat, and that may mean adding pins. We are going to put in a based stitch first before we actually use the cover stitch machine. At this time, I can go ahead and clip this long serger tail because I'm going to sew over that seam to secure it when I'm doing this bottom hem. Okay, so all we're doing right now, folding up 1 inch, measuring it, pressing it, pinning if needed. All right, so we have folded up 1 inch from the bottom edge and pressed and then pinned all the way around the bottom, and we're ready to put in a basting stitch. That will come out later, but it's going to hold the fabric in place, hold it right where we want it in order to use the cover stitch machine. The basting stitch we're going to use is just a regular 1 on the stitch selector, and then you're going to increase to a stitch length of 5, which is the highest it can go. You do not need to backstitch. You're going to start on one of the side seams, and you're going to be stitching about 1/4 of an inch from the folded edge. This is going to hold that fabric in place for us when we take it over to the cover stitch machine. When you're cover stitching, you have to have this hem laying flat on the wrong side, so we won't be able to see this fold. So the basting stitches is a good way for us to make sure that that fabric stays where it needs to be. So I'm going to keep my fabric in line with this part of, it's just that little inner clear piece on the presser foot, keeping it in line with that. The problem is if I get a too wide of a seam allowance on the basting stitch, is that it would end up intersecting with my cover stitch, which isn't a huge deal, except for it makes it harder to rip the basting stitch out later. And it's already one extra step that, you know, you may not have wanted to have done anyway, but it's necessary. So then to make it easier on yourself, stitch further away from the cut end and closer to the fold. So about 1/4 of an inch away, and then you won't have as much chance of having it intersect with your cover stitches. All right, as we get back to the starting spot, you actually don't need to backstitch here either. Just get close to the ends, okay? Then you are done. You'll just raise your needle, raise your presser foot, and then you can cut all that loose. And then you are ready to go to the cover stitch machine. So depending on the steps we've gone through in class, you may or may not know how to thread the cover stitch machine. But it does need to be properly threaded before you begin. So whether you did that on your own or it was done for you, you'll want to test that on a scrap piece of fabric. This is the same fabric that I am going to be hemming in just a minute, and it's important that you find either the same fabric or the same weight of fabric when you're doing your test. And I also want to make sure that I'm doing my practice across the stretchiness of the fabric, because the hem is the stretchy part of your garment. You're going to slide that fabric, and I've just folded it over in a double layer, just like my hem would be. You're going to lower the presser foot. And I'm going to start right at the end here. Lower the presser foot. I'm going to turn my hand wheel toward me one whole turn where the needles go down all the way and then they come back up. Before they go down a second time, that's when I'm going to go ahead and put my foot down on the foot pedal and stitch until I get close to the end of my practice seam. Then I'm going to turn the hand wheel toward me one turn and then reverse all the way one turn until the needles are up. Now I'm going to raise up the presser foot. I'm going to turn the fabric sideways, and then I'm going to grab a hold of those threads and pull from the threads. When I get about 6 inches here, I'm going to trim. Okay, so now I've got a nice long tail. And then what you're going to do is you're going to look to see that you have 2 parallel stitch lines, and then you look on the back to make sure you don't have any gaps or breaks in the stitching. Mine actually looks good, and you can see here that this still stretches. Okay, that's what this cover stitch does. On the back of your hem, you're going to have this looped looking stitch, and then on the front of your shirt, you'll have the 2 parallel stitch lines. When you are ready to get started, I've already put in a piece of blue painter's tape, which can peel up really easily, but I've already stuck it down to the correct seam allowance for the bottom hem. So this will not work, this blue tape will not work when you're doing the sleeve hems. All right, you'll want to make sure that your machine is threaded with a coordinating thread color, especially on the 2 threads coming through the needle. So I'm going to use a gray thread. It's pretty light, but it's the only gray I have. So you'll want to find a color that coordinates. We're going to start on one of the side seams. Again, we've already base stitched all the way around. I'm going to line the edge of the fabric up with that blue tape mark. And just like we had practiced, I'm going to lower the presser foot, turn the hand wheel toward me. When it's back up, then I'm going to just start using my foot pedal. And the whole time I'm going to be watching right along here to make sure that it stays lined up even and as straight as I can make it. You want to feel your way and make sure there's no lumps or bumps, that the hem is still laying flat. All right, as we approach the end, this is where you want to try to make sure to line up your 2 parallel stitch lines. So you're going to try just to stay even again with that blue tape line. Go slow if you need to. Okay, so mine didn't exactly line up, but they were very close. I'm going to intersect my stitches by about 3 or 4 stitches, and then when I'm finished, I'm going to lower my needles by turning the hand wheel toward me, and now turn the hand wheel away from me. They're in the highest position. I'm going to raise up that presser foot, pull these off to the side, grab those threads, and pull. Cut, leaving a long tail, and I'm going to have to go finish up those tails here in a little while. So what you should see on the backhand side is a looped stitch that caught all along that hem. Now what I can go do is, and I did this on purpose, I had you all do a little bit of a narrower hem than you had measured, because we would rather have this extra fabric hanging off that we can go by and trim rather than have the hem itself be too wide and not catch all of this. So that looks actually really nice. So what we need to do next is we need to grab a seam ripper, and you're going to go in to your basting stitch and pick through the seam every few inches, and then you'll want to go back wherever you picked those out, and you'll just start pulling those threads out, and eventually you'll just tear out the seam all the way around. That basting stitch is going to come all the way out, and then all you'll be left with is your really nice hem that looks just like that. Looks professional.